There's an idea that I want to convey, and I'm having trouble finding the way in. Usually when I have a good idea, I let it germinate and ruminate on it until I have that first line. It's the line that feels like the seed or the catalyst that allows me to make the rest of the thing, and I don't have that for this. I gave kind of a primer last week on what pattern recognition in our brains is actually doing. Today I want to talk about how that manifests and gives art and artists a necessary, continuous place in society. Here's the thing. Our five senses are not designed to experience reality as it is. They are designed, evolved, if you prefer that term, to keep us alive, and they do that very well. But we don't see things as they are. Quantum mechanics all tell us that the world is not the same as we perceive it. Instead, what our brains do is basically a manifestation of what I was talking about with our subconscious, is a radical form of data compression through storytelling. We do that with all of life. I wonder where the boundaries of our reality actually exists, or if there is even any boundary. I think that's one of the larger pursuits of my life, is exploring the boundaries of our reality. If life has a purpose, it's to find joy. A lot of people find joy in simplicity, in accepting the narrative with which they're presented, the one that society says, the one that tells them, go to the job, find minimal or some level of satisfaction in the job, get the paycheck, go home, build a life that you want. What that life looks like varies mildly from person to person, but largely it exists within that same domain or constraint. Last week, again, I talked about our brain as narrative storytelling engines. And if there are sources of information that do not fit into the narrative, then one of two things happens. Either the narrative changes such that the new information can be reconciled and assimilated, or the person becomes psychotic with two disparate narratives going on in their heads. The example I cut out for political reasons is religion versus science. A lot of people, because we have trouble articulating the nature of higher dimensional reality, we don't have a semantic for it, we don't have definitions for it. I'll get into that in another video. Science and spirituality seem like they're not connected. No one's made a really good effort that I'm aware of to connect the two in Western civilization. This discrepancy doesn't exist in the same way in Asian cultures. There is no gap between spirituality and science in Japan. They accept the idea of ghosts and demons and spirits inhabiting everything in a form of religion that anthropology calls animism. We don't have that in the West. We have rejected spirituality for the sake of disenfranchising the Catholic Church and to empower ourselves to make our own lives outside of the decrees of a papal edict. The point of what I'm trying to get at is that an artist is a person who has these disparate narratives in our brains. And we've trained ourselves, I say we, I consider myself in the art space, whether I'm an artist and capable of making art, capital A, only you get to say that. But it's something that I've given my life to as a subset of my greater interest in defining the boundaries of our reality. To that end, an artist is a person who allows themselves to feel, who's entered into a space where we've trained ourselves to enter into those flow states of unified consciousness, such that what is a disparate narrative in our brains can be externalized out of our subconscious mind, such that our conscious mind can then take it and process it rationally and then feed it back into our subconscious mind, again, to reconcile that disparate narrative. It is a critical aspect of the human experience. It is a critical part of all civilization, because unfortunately, that form of data compression that we have is lossy. A lot of information gets lost. If you're running equations with incomplete data, you will end up with inequalities. math that doesn't reconcile, numbers that don't make sense. And the only way to reconcile them is to find places where the data doesn't match. So, for instance, in Western philosophy, there is the idea that time is linear and that linear time is not a fixed abstract thing, but instead is something that the individual gets to live within the domains of possibility in that linear time space. In other words, we have choice. We have free will. This is not what I think. This is a philosophy in the West. An emergent property of that philosophy is the idea of free will and predestination. Dichotomies. Spirituality says predestination. Human-centric philosophy says free will. And we define ourselves and our capacity and our sense of moral rightness based on how we choose to act, which presupposes that we have choice. But free will and predestination cannot coexist completely as a single narrative. They are in contradiction with each other. One possibility I came up with that I really like is the idea of choice nodes. We live and then we enter a fork in the road where we get to make a choice, where we become completely aware of our situation and the implications of the choice that we're making. We make the choice and then we get launched on a trajectory that seems like we still have free will, but we don't actually have it. Instead, we're launched along that trajectory, the ballistic trajectory, meaning the nature of our being launched, the velocity and the directionality of it is determined at that choice node. Even though we appear to have choice on the trajectory, we in fact do not until we hit another choice node. That's one explanation. Again, it's not what I currently understand, but I'll get to that again when we get into physics and spirituality. When we encounter these dichotomies, these contradictions of things like free will and predestination, the riddle isn't to actually reconcile them. What it's telling us is that our unified narrative is not working. It's not explaining reality as it is in itself. It's a crack in the philosophy. It's a manifestation of that incomplete narrative because of the lossy nature of our data compression. And that's the place of the artist, is to find those spaces. It's where the idea of the struggling artist comes from. Not that it's necessary for an artist to struggle. I'm not saying you have to starve on purpose, that you have to put yourself in harmful situations. If you're any good at looking around, you'll see them. Like, they're not hard to spot. When you see people tending towards a dictator or lending themselves to abusive situations or responding as though violence is the right and appropriate response to any moral or emotional conundrum, like, those are cracks. It is the artist's job to call out these issues, to make a point of not saying these things are not reconciled, but to say, look, these things can be reconciled and we need to deal with it. I don't think it's the artist's job to answer questions. You do that, you should be in religion. You should be a professor. It is the artist's job to ask questions, and it is the audience to resolve those questions in conversation with everyone. In other words, art is a question put out to society saying, this is how we live. Is this how we want to live? Cinema, when it's at its best, novels, paintings, all forms of art, even architecture, ask this question. Do we want to live this way, or can we live another way? What is the human experience, and is it the experience that we want to be having? That's the place of art and culture. It's a necessary place. We are the error correction. We artists are the error correction in the radical compression nature of the storytelling engine that is what we call society. And I don't think that position can be fully understood without the presupposition that our brains are pattern recognition machines generating narratives from which we think we understand the boundaries of our reality. It's a weird thing to actually be filming the movie. There's all of these emotions that happen. As the director, as pretty much the only producer on set. My wife stuck around to do a lot of PA work, and Matt Wallace, the writer, was helping. It's just a lot of decisions to make, a lot of things to manage, and at the same time maintain that state of creativity that I need to be in order to make the choices where the things continue to be beautiful, on top of being the cinematographer and the sound guy. Yeah, I think it's going well. The actors are all being amazing. No weaknesses there. The location was exactly what I knew it would be. Again, I prefer to film in real locations, and ideally if it's a restaurant or a store, that the store be open, because there's all kinds of other things that you get for free that you wouldn't otherwise get. Means a little bit more work in post, but yeah. Up until about last night, I was having these panic attacks that today would not go well. And then I just thought about what it was I was actually panicking about. And there was nothing specific, because I know how to do what I'm doing. Like, I've done it before. I've done it. It's true that Chris Cosmos is the most famous named actor I've ever worked with to date. But he's an actor, and he's a good guy. And it's all working out. So when I asked myself what exactly that panic attack was about, it reminded me of this philosophy class that I took, where anxiety is fear that hasn't yet been named. Once you name it, it becomes fear. And so when I tried to give it a name, there wasn't one. And with that realization, the anxiety immediately left. Go Gentle wrapped. It was only a 2-day shoot, Monday and Wednesday, April 20th and 22nd. I found it's difficult to say which is in control, me or the universe, but I think that when I'm in the right space, I feel like my art is collaborating with the universe, or rather I am co-creating reality with the universe. So there are times where the camera appears shaky in Go Gentle. And I think it's thematically appropriate, but also it was caused because my Ronin SC gimbal is too weak for the heavy camera that I have on it. I can't afford another one at this point. So yeah, I balanced it properly beforehand. It just wouldn't, it kept quitting. It kept doing its shaky, trembly thing, and that's not great. I don't like shaky cam. So I just disabled it, locked it in place, and then used the gimbal because it holds the power pack, the battery that I need to run the R5C. There are other moments where I decided to just put the camera on a tripod, and so it's locked off, which we'll see how it works. There are other moments where the gimbal worked great, and I was able to orbit things, and it all worked flawlessly. There's a scene of a support group in Go Gentle that felt like the camera just needed to be almost whip panning. But a whip pan doesn't work the same on a gimbal, because the gimbal's response is like to keep the motion fluid. It'll accelerate and decelerate, so you don't get the same whip pan effect like you would if I just handheld. I'm curious to see how the edit is. I did miss one shot, but it's not a critical shot. It's implied from the narrative, and you know, I wish I'd got it, but I didn't. But everything else seemed to be really good. So I'll check in with you all next week and see if I've made any progress. It was exhausting. There were moments of terror, there was moments of fear, there was moments of self-doubt, all of it. That's what it is, to try and do something that's difficult and try and do it well. Well, this one's gone on long enough. I'll see you next week, or rather, you'll see me.